Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. On May 9th, Make Us Visible Florida legislation to include AAPI History in our K-12 curriculum was signed into law. This has been a community effort over the past 2 years. This has been a unifying bill that has brought diverse communities together. We had 75 bipartisan co-sponsors from Florida across religions, races, and ethnicities. Our initial standalone bill passed the House with unanimous support, and we went through every committee in the House and Senate unanimously. I've been grateful for the support from Floridians across the state, and although this has been challenging, getting to the finish line is a major accomplishment. Florida students in grades K-12 will benefit from this legislation because all histories will be taught together. By including AAPI history in K-12 education alongside other current required curriculum such as African American history, Holocaust education, and Hispanic contributions, we are all elevated. Our histories are intertwined and cannot be told without one another. Progress isn't made in a day. It's incremental. It happens one step at a time. In Florida, this has meant working across the aisle and compartmentalizing for me personally. It has not been easy, but it's been necessary if I want to see change. It has been a difficult 2 years of uncomfortable conversations and volunteering time I didn't always have. As you know, I have a full-time job, I have family to take care of, and so this was truly a passion project. And so now I think it's healthy and necessary to celebrate progress, especially because there's so much happening right now that has been negative and difficult to digest. We can't advocate for one another if we aren't part of the conversation. Now that this bill has passed, AAPIs are part of the conversation. I'm grateful that we have taken a huge step forward in helping ensure American history will be taught accurately. Celebrating this win does not diminish or push aside any of the very real struggles we face here in Florida. However, because of this bill, we can stand stronger in solidarity with all communities whose stories have not been told. Looking ahead, Make Us Visible Florida will continue to work with diverse communities to ensure all K-12 schools and districts have access to curriculum that reflect all our histories and contributions. If you want to hear the behind-the-scenes story of how this bill became a law, listen on. Take your time as Oscar and I chat for almost an hour and a half, and it still doesn't really share all of the work that really went into making this happen. Thank you to everyone who supported and encouraged me from day one. I appreciate you. Please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan. Now on with the show. Hello. It's another podcast episode with my favorite co-host / today host, Oscar.
Hello. I have to say that if I'm hosting, right?
I don't know. It's my hello, but
Hola.
There you go. Make it your own.
Well, today we are going to discuss the passing of a historic bill in Florida and the story of how that came into fruition. How do you like that?
Oh, nice introduction. Thank you. So for those of us listening to our lovely voices, thank you for that. And those of you watching, you'll see that we've got the MUVFL banner behind us to represent and remind us of what we're talking about today, because you and I tend to go a little bit off track.
And also, well, there's no track to begin with. So that the main reason we get off track is because we don't start with a track. But we do have a vision for this podcast today, which is to discuss the passing of the inclusion of Asian American history in K-12.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And today we're speaking, I don't know when this is actually going to be aired, but we're speaking on May 10, as you mentioned earlier. And yesterday, May 9, was the passing of our bill, signed into legislation. And that's a really kind of surreal, but very exciting moment.
Okay, so the first thing is, let's talk about exactly what the legislation says and what it's intended to do?
Okay, well, I don't have it in front of me, but
it doesn't need to be verbatim.
It is the required instruction of Asian American and Pacific Islander history in our K through 12 curriculum. I think it includes like civic contributions, culture, immigration, but specifically there is a line also that includes the teaching of Japanese internment camps.
Okay. So the reason this is important, from my understanding, you can clarify, is that you were just asking for inclusion here, where there were already other histories of Americans from different backgrounds that was being taught, but it was just that Asian American history was not being taught. Is that correct?
Yeah, from a technical standpoint, Holocaust studies, African American studies, history, women's contributions, and Hispanic heritage were included in the legislation. And so for me, looking at that and kind of all the reasons behind why I wanted this to get done, Asian American history needs to be written into that legislation in order to ensure that it's being taught to our youth.
Okay. So then, and I'm jumping around here. We're going forward before we go backwards. So what do you hope? Well, not what do you hope? What is the next step now? So the legislation has been passed, it's been signed. What's the next step?
And so now we look to the next 3 to 5 years for curriculum to be put into place, to be formed, to be, I guess, standardized. Mm-hmm. And that process is very long, very tedious. And if Make Us Visible Florida is not kind of involved and on top of that, then I'm not really sure how this would get implemented, or not. It's not a matter of if, it's just in what way. And so I know that from the standpoint of Make Us Visible on a national level, we've had a lot of conversation about ensuring that Make Us Visible Florida is a partner to the Department of Education and the School Board Association, right? So we want to make sure that resources are available, that our voices aren't left out of the conversation. Over the past several months, when I went to Tallahassee in order to have conversations with legislators, it was recommended to me by more than one person that we ensure we are part of the conversation, that we ensure that Asian Americans, specifically Asian American scholars or teachers, people who have an idea of how curriculum is formed, what it's like in the classroom, but also of Asian American background, can contribute to the curriculum building so that the voices of AAPIs do not get left out.
Okay. So we're looking at 3 to 5 years for that, plus the 2+ years it took you to get here. So this is a nice, simple 7-8 year project. That's nice.
In just a few years, you'll be manager.
So you're still technically right now washing lettuce.
Yeah, I'm still technically washing lettuce. And for listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, Oscar and I usually tangent and quote at least once a week, if not per day, something from Coming to America. So there's that. But essentially, government is slow, right? It's meant to be slow. It's meant to take its time to get to where it needs to be, which is why it was so important that we got this legislation passed now, which is why I really wanted to get it passed last year, because I knew that this was the long haul. I knew that this was, once we passed the bill, it didn't mean tomorrow or the next day, kids suddenly are going to be learning more about AAPI history. Having said that, teachers can immediately start to implement and teach some facets of AAPI history. And I think some already do, but right now it's required. It's a requirement. And so that plan is now in place to where it's going to be standard across the state versus left up to certain teachers who decide that, during AAPI Heritage Month, for example, they'll do a chapter on, the Chinese Exclusion Act, or they'll do a chapter on some of the bigger and more common themes that we hear, like Japanese internment camps or figures in history that maybe we have heard about versus figures in history we've never heard about, and I've talked to so many people about the fact that they never got to learn
Right.
this history, and so I say 3 to 5 years, and I'll be very honest. The team who helped kind of put this in place, Representative Placencia, they were very honest. They said, "Look, we want you to know that it takes 5 years to go into the curriculum. It takes a long time. I'm pushing for 3 to 5 because everyone told me it takes 4 to 5 years to pass a bill, and I did it in 2. So ambitious."
So let's go for the 3-year mark. Okay. All right, so now we're going to take a step back then, and let's talk about what was the impetus that got you here, because obviously nothing gets done on your own, but you spearheaded this bill, and
With a spear? No, just kidding.
Literally with a spear.
I could have, but I didn't.
If you could imagine a pit bull with a spear, that's I guess how you got this through. The reason I say that is because, well, I used to own a pit bull, and he was a beautiful dog. But one thing that I noticed
listeners are thinking, God, he's digging himself into a hole here. Where is this going?
One thing about pit bulls is once they bite onto something, they will not let go. And for the longest time, I've told you that you're like, well, that's it. She's locked onto this, so this is not something you're going to let go of. So I guess take us through what was and I know you've shared this already, but because we're discussing this, maybe there's some listeners who don't know the full story of why you started it. So
sure. Well, as you know, I do tend to get very distracted and hyper-focused on something I decide to put my mind to. And you've had to kind of live with this from day to day. So I'm going to ask you a question later about that. But essentially, this really did start from the pandemic. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Former president calling the pandemic the Kung flu, making fun of the virus in terms of it being Chinese people, and that was very damaging to the community. So one, specifically Kung flu, was really insulting for me because obviously I'm a Kung Fu teacher.
Right.
Yeah, you might know that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you're aware.
Wow. Like that insight.
And that's our tradition and our style. Like you and I talk about this a lot on our podcast, on our 40 Fit Fu, on all sorts of other social media things that we've done. We've done lectures on it. We've done seminars, and Kung Fu is something that is beyond a sport for us, right? It is something that is sacred. So we wake up and we don't think, well, I'm going to do Kung Fu today. We wake up and we just start our day, and we go through and we do everything to the best of our ability. We try to be focused. We try to be respectful of people we come in contact with. We try to be kind to them. We try to work really hard, and we do all of that. And that's a lifestyle. So I wake up and I feel like I do Kung Fu every day, and I don't have to think about it. It's just part of who I am. And so the words Kung Flu and saying that Chinese people are dangerous was an attack. Like it felt very personal. It felt like a personal attack. And then community started sharing that this felt like an attack. Like this felt like people were being discriminated against. Parents were talking to me about them being harassed on the highway. One of the parents I've shared several times when news stories ask, hey, what's the horrible thing that's happened in the community? And I'm like, we see everything happening in the community. Then this has always been happening in the community, but it was absolutely heightened by COVID and being blamed for COVID. Anyone looking Asian being blamed for COVID. Really early on, before it really got to its height, they started to talk about COVID, and they knew it originated in China, that something happened there and that it was spreading. This was like very early before lockdowns. And I think you remember, you and I were talking about it, and I had gone to do an interview with Rep. Escamani. Right. And I said, you know what, just the other day on the news, they were talking about COVID, and they just started showing Chinese restaurants here in Orlando. And I was like, that's going to be very damaging for our local community, our people. And they just, instead of, I don't know what the news does, but instead of portraying something accurate, they started to connect dots for people that weren't and shouldn't have been there. Right. And so I saw a lot of danger. And while we maybe didn't see people getting murdered in the subway or being attacked in the streets in the same way we did in San Francisco or New York, Florida not being a walking city, right? We did see fear. We did see discrimination. We did see and hear about people who were feeling threatened. Quick statistic is that particularly young Asian women don't feel safe. Like, I don't remember what the number is, if it's 1 in 8, but it's a really high percentage of, after all of this, like, women, particularly Asian women, Asian American women, not feeling safe, not feeling like they have a sense of belonging. And so I figured this is only going to get worse. And then we had the Atlanta spa shooting.
And that was the breaking point.
That was the breaking point. You know, you had started to finally see people like Amanda Wen and Daniel Day Kim and Daniel Wu kind of talking about, hey, this is a problem, this is a problem. And then when that happened, and it was definitively like AAPI targeted, it was definitively something where I think it was everyone's breaking point. I remember that day, it was around the time of us getting ready to, I think maybe do a show, or we were prepping for something, and just like hearing that news, it was so depressing and so upsetting. And I get the same way, and you can probably let our listeners, whenever there's a school shooting, whenever there is a mass shooting that young people are killed, or just, not that everyone being killed isn't bad, but it's just, you just feel like it's such a shame. It's just such an unnecessary occurrence. And so I remember that day feeling very helpless, like I couldn't do anything to help the families of survivors. I know there was donations that started to be set up and things like that, but I really felt very helpless. And you know, I don't like feeling helpless.
Right. So then the first step then was the petition. Is that correct? The
first step was the petition, but before that, what happened was there were some vigils, right? There was a vigil for the victims of the shooting. And I was a speaker at the UCF Moving Mountains vigil.
Right.
And I was really happy to be able to speak at that, but I'll be honest, it was just exhaustive. I don't know if you recall, but suddenly out of nowhere, the news was all over this, right? They wanted to know, you know, he was coming to Florida next.
Right.
What do you think? Let's talk about this. And you and I often criticize the news cycle and how it's been challenging for journalists to be able to actually tell the stories that are there and wanting to instill fear. And good job. You're doing a great job, because fear is there. But it was so exhaustive. And I know that you also know during Lunar New Year, I send out a zillion press releases. I try to let people know this is a celebratory time. Look what's happening. You know, kudos to the community, not just the AAPI community, but everyone coming out to celebrate. And if we're lucky, we get a couple news sources show up. Or one year, I remember there was like this huge thing that went down in Orlando, so no one showed up. Right. And so, but as soon as there's something like this, I'm getting hounded, and I actually had to just like shut down. Right. I had to turn off the phone. I had to say no more interviews. And I was mentally exhausted. And so then I had to take a moment. I took a step back. And then from there, that is when I said, okay, now I've taken a breath. Like, how can I go into action? Two things happened. One is I reached out to Representative Eskamani and Sheriff Mina. Sheriff Mina, because I wanted to know, is our community safe? What are you going to do to protect the community? And how can we bridge the gap between community and law enforcement? What can be done? Because our community does not feel safe contacting you. So he took my call personally. He was listening. He was engaged, and we set up a time to meet further and discuss having what then later became a live as well as a webinar on bystander intervention from my standpoint, so I could share that and they could share the see something, say something, what to do, how to let community know that there was provisions for multilingual community members that could call in. And when I called Representative Eskamani, because I had a good relationship with her, she shows up to all the Lunar New Year celebrations. We see her at all the events. And she said, absolutely, you should start the petition. And when you start a petition, it asks you, who are you petitioning? What is the result you want? What are you trying to get done? And I said, I don't know. Who am I petitioning about this? And she said, oh, the commissioner, the education commissioner. That's who you can put in as the name. And So I said, okay, I'll do that. And, at the time I did that. And then so started the petition. And then I said, now I don't know what to do. And let me just kind of let that go. I thought it was just going to be something so people could show their support.
Right.
And then Representative Escamani called and said, hey, I want to write this bill with you.
So the track, there's a few kind of steps that it looks like, right? There's the thought process of maybe there's some personal attacks of the Asian communities. There's then the actual attacks of the Asian community. There's community organizers doing great things like vigils at UCF, which I remember the video for that. There was a lot of people there, which was a really nice showing. And then so has to be this awareness of what's happening. There's things that are happening. There's awareness of things that are happening. There's community involvement. There's reaching out to, if there's something like fear, something like law enforcement. And I agree. I think Sheriff Mina handled that really well. He always has been very open to conversations and also to reaching out and accessible and reaching out to the community. So props to him. And then of course, huge props to Representative Escamani, who is just, she must have a doppelganger, and just
she does have a twin who does help, but she really is able to multiply. Was it Naruto's shadow clone?
She must shadow
she
clone.
Shadow clones.
So doing that, you're writing the petition. This is just a big recap, I know. And then now Representative Escamani says, hey, this petition, let's make it into a bill.
Yes.
That's what the next step is.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, how does that work? And I got with her team and they explained to me the very basics of, so we write a bill, we need to get a Senate sponsor who will also write a bill. They need to be identical. And then we send it on its way to the journey of how a bill becomes a law, which over the last 2 years, I've learned there's a million different ways that can happen. We can get to that later, but essentially that's what happened. So then because I'm in Orlando, I contacted Senator Stewart, who also we've met and shows up at events over the years. And she was really great and was like, yep, absolutely, I'll sponsor your bill. And so back then I had no idea that even getting a bill sponsor for something is a challenge. Right. Because senators can write as many bills as they want, but House reps only can choose 7. So this was like taking up a bill spot, and Rep. Escamani being Asian American herself, being someone who's always advocating for marginalized communities, I just thought this was a great fit. This is going to be fantastic. Sure, now what's next? I did not know what road lied ahead. I don't know what road was ahead and how difficult it was really going to be.
Right.
So I started to reach out to the Illinois chapters of Asian Americans Advancing Justice. I tried to research who got the bill passed in Illinois because that was the first. And I just was basically help, ... I got in touch with Asian American Education Project and they put me on to these fine folks right here.
Right.
The Make Us Visibles.
So now we're at a crucial point of the story.
Yes. And this is June now. So if we're thinking about timeline, I believe March was the shooting. I started a petition right away. And now we're in June. I already have a bill sponsor. Someone who's committed
to writing the bill and sponsoring the bill on both sides, because that's something I wasn't aware of, was that to get something passed in Florida, you've got the House side and the Senate side. Both have to be identical. Both have to be passed
at the same time
with the same wording, which makes it just so complicated. So you were in your mind probably, wow, I'm really far ahead here.
Well, I didn't think I was far ahead. I always think I'm far behind, and that's how I stay ahead.
But okay, so maybe some people thought you were far ahead. And then you get in contact with the beautiful people at Make Us Visible.
Yes, they are beautiful.
The national team. So take us, maybe a quick recap on what the Make Us Visible national team was.
So at that time, Make Us Visible Connecticut had been formed, I believe, and was passing their law. And so they were 6 or 7 months ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And so when I spoke with one of the co-founders, Kate Lee, she explained, you're just going to be building the plane as you fly, basically, is how she put it. And that's her analogy. And she was right. and was just telling me these are the things that we plan to do in other states. We would like to absolutely adopt Florida if you're open to it and make you part of the Make Us Visible family. We've passed legislation in Connecticut and working on, I believe at the time was New Jersey, and they were going through that process. I think they had already gotten to the process where either the bill had just passed or was about to pass because they passed in June. And so they were 6 or 7 months ahead of us.
Right.
You know, they were 6 or 7 months ahead of us in the process. And so I was really looking for experts, people who knew what they were doing, had been through legislation. And I was like, okay, great. Yeah, let me think about it. And then like the next day I said, hey, yeah, sign me up for that Make Us Visible Florida stuff. And so I, by default, became the state director for Make Us Visible Florida because it was just me by myself. And now I had the national team behind me. And that really was Kate and then later Jeff, who is the policy, director. And so they kind of would meet and we kind of discuss like next steps, like here's what you do. And they're like, oh, you already have a bill sponsor. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, great. And so because that year wasn't an election year, the legislation, I believe, started in October. And so the session was technically January, February, ended in March. And October was when our bill was actually written. And so I would meet over the summer with the legislative policy writing team, and we decided on what the language should be. And the Senate and the House rep side got together and our bill was ready. And then it was born in October.
Right. This is 2021.
Yes.
Right. And actually, I remember you saying, oh, Oscar, I just talked with this group and I really like them. Like, I really like them. So I think I'm going to go with them.
Yeah.
So that's just, and you were right. They were great people. But I think it's just, you said something and then you had Make Us Visible Florida, and you were the state director, and you said, and then, we kind of met. Kind of met, that's cute. Because you guys met for like 20 hours a week. So I thought kind of met was nice. That's really funny coming from my side. But so you guys met a lot. Maybe,
so
maybe not.
From your side, how do you remember March through October of 2021?
I don't know. Just if you were on the phone or on a Zoom call, I was like, oh, you're with Kate and Jeff. Or just Kate, or just Jeff. Or starting with Kate, then later Jeff, or then maybe starting with Jeff, then later Kate. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm trying to think of what TV series I finished, but it must have been multiple. But so that's nice that, you guys did meet. You kind of met. That's good. And so this is October now of 2021. The legislative session ends in May, so
No, in March, because not an election year, so it started in January.
Right, sorry.
So January, February was our
So it ends in March. So your goal is, all right, by March we're going to have this thing done, and then check.
Yes.
So what happens between October and March then?
So between October and March, I'm told the goal is to get co-sponsors and to get commitments from legislators to sponsor the bill or vote yes on the bill, which I still honestly didn't know what that meant. And then as January rolled around, I heard, okay, so there's this thing called committee assignments. And so what happens is your bills have to go through committee stops, they call them, and then they have to pass those. And then they have to finally go to the floor of both chambers and then get passed through. And then after that, the governor signs the bill. But I also didn't know that you didn't automatically get assigned or put on the agenda for these committees. Most bills die and don't even make it to a committee, meaning they're never even heard.
Right.
So thousands of bills get written, but most of them are never even heard. And so then we realized, okay, not just co-sponsor, we need to rally to get our bills on the agenda. And so we were so excited because we did get on the Senate agenda.
Right.
And I know I've talked about this before. We did a podcast on it, and it was like the Super Bowl of legislative committee hearings, because we sat there for, I think it was like an hour and a half of testimony on the anti-CRT bill.
Right.
And so this is the education, committee for that on the Senate side. And you were on live. Jeff and Kate were on live watching. And I'm texting with you all. And the senator announced, we will not go overtime. This will end at, I can't remember the time now, let's call it 12:30. This will end at 12:30, and it's 12 o'clock, and then it's 12:15. And we're like, we're not going to get heard. We drove all the way up to Tallahassee. And I say we, there was a nice group of humans that decided to drive across state. We had people from Miami and Jacksonville and Tallahassee, as well as the Tampa area, Orlando. We're all there waiting anxiously. We also had supporters from Representative Escamani's team that were there. Right. They're out there usually canvassing for other bills. And so they came over to support. And then I said, okay, it's 12:20. We're not going to get heard. At 12:22, we're not going to get heard. And Senator Stewart sitting in the front row and waiting. And then it was 12:25, and they said, okay, we're going to call your bill now. And I think at that time it was HB 281, because I think this year was HB 287, or I'm sorry, SB. So it's SB. I'm not going to remember the number from that year, but they called us, and it was 5 minutes. And she got up there and she said, okay, I'm going to present the bill. And she goes, I have all these other papers here, but there's no time, so we're just going to let it go. And the community that came out, they so very much wanted to testify and share. They so very much wanted their voices to be heard, because this whole time, please keep in mind, this is still COVID time.
Right.
Everyone is still wearing masks. Everybody still feels, kind of silenced in a sense, right? You kind of have this feeling of, okay, we're at the Capitol, we're all sitting very distanced. I was feeling very nervous, to be honest. I hadn't really gone out that much in public. And so I jumped up when they said, okay, and now we're going to close, because now it's like 12:27, right. 12:28. And I said, I want 1 minute of testimony time to represent all of these people. And I had been in communication with with the staff manager of the meeting. And I said, look, we're all here. I will be brief. I will keep it to a minute. Please let me speak. And I was able to get up there and speak really, really quickly through my bill. And then it ended. And then Senator Stewart came to close. And then we had a vote. And it was a unanimous vote, just to hear each name called. And yes, 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 yes. And then for it to pass, and then it was like 12:29, and then it was like, meeting is adjourned, right at 12:30. I mean, the energy in the room was so explosive.
Right.
And the high and the adrenaline I had was so immense. It felt a little bit like winning the lotto.
Right.
And we rode that high for that day, and it was a good day, because it really set up the foundation for what would come later. But at the same time, immediately within week after week through the legislative session of us not getting on another agenda, with us realizing we were not going to get on an agenda. And that quickly was like a bucket of cold water on our heads.
Right. So there's the highs and the lows, right? And
lows.
And the lows were pretty low, especially when you realized, so the legislative session is pretty much ending now.
Yeah.
You haven't been on any further agendas, any on the House side? None, right? There was none on the House side. One on the Senate side.
One.
And then, so it's not, now you realize, that meant that it was a clear sign that you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, and knowing now what I know, had I known back then, they just basically were not going to waste time hearing us if they knew it wasn't going. So what they do is they kind of watch each other. And if it's going on one, it's going on one, they kind of start to push it. But I also know that you actually had to be there to handhold it through. Like you couldn't just leave it up to hope and that, this bill's going to move forward.
So unfortunately, this did not end with success in 2022. What were your thoughts? Because my thought is always like, all right, well, I'll support Mimi with whatever she wants. I saw that you were very, very upset. I was concerned with the stress levels that this was causing. But of course, whatever it is that you feel you needed to do. So what made you then decide? Because, we started off the podcast with the success of getting this thing getting signed, but that was I guess, a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, I don't like losing. We have a new friend who is a huge ally, supporter, and advocate for Make Us Visible Florida now, Jose. And he said this past weekend to us that, I'm allergic to losing. I said, me too.
Right. So then because it's kind of a blur for me now that I think about it, for 2022, from March till then when you had to get momentum, right? Because the bill has already been created, has been written, but now it's gone nowhere. And my understanding also is that this is very common, that it's actually would be extremely uncommon for a bill to get written and passed in the same year.
Yes, unless you are the one in power and can just push your agenda through and just get everybody to sign off, and you have the majority of the House and the Senate.
So then that does happen.
That does happen for bills that are basically like kind of express laned, I would call them. But I think this year, less than 3% of the bills that were written were passed, to give you kind of an idea. When I spoke with a lot of people up in Tallahassee, with all this time I spent there, the sentiment was an average of 5 years. And we even met someone that had been, well, we didn't meet them, but they were telling us about someone that was just left the office, and like he's been trying for his bill for the last 12 years. Now, I don't know what that bill was, right? But there are a lot of really good bills. And there are a lot of really good bills that all even bipartisanly supported by legislators, and they still don't pass.
Right.
So it was a real kick in the gut, because I think I'm putting it very mildly when I say I don't like losing, and I see this as a loss, even though I told my team, this is not a loss. We're building a foundation. We're going to come back stronger. And there is truth to that, because for every state out there that might be trying to do this, or for anybody that's trying to work on legislation, that year before, you may not get it passed, but it's not a loss. You have to think of the long game. You have to think of this as a 2-year or a 3-year adventure, and just go, okay, this is the journey. And so that's just going to be a kind of a little bit of a downhill moment, but for me, I did take it as a loss personally to my team, which at the time I had maybe less than 10 humans that were really active. Because with Make Us Visible Florida, it's all volunteer based. Of course, the Wallam Temple kids help out when they can. Right. They go to public events, they perform. Whenever we have things, there's tabling. All of that community awareness matters. It does, because it's like that visibility and just kind of making sure your name is being circulated. But at the end of the day, it's the people who are making the phone calls. It's the people who are setting up meetings with legislation. It's the people who are really putting in the hours, the creative team that consistently would be putting out messaging. And so for that first year, we had a nice team that was eager, but I think everyone, including me, and that it all falls on me as leadership, not leading them to success, but also not leading them to go, here's exactly what we need to do. Like, I had an idea, but as Kate put it, we're building the plane as we fly and go. And so hopefully by the time we're airborne, like all the engines are in place, right? That the essentials. But I think there are systems to be checked. I think there is a more methodical way going forward. I feel like I have a good formula for it. And so that year was rough, and then it was time for regrouping. I mean, I would love for you to share, because this is my podcast, right? So this is not a news interview. I think we can be super honest, finally, because I feel like I've been a bit oppressed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, okay, so I'll just take it from my side, right?
Yeah.
Because I've supported you with whatever you want, but I'm not involved in this bill at all. So I don't give a shit what anyone thinks about how I see this stuff, right? So here's the way I see it is, it looked like, from my side, that you had two great sponsors for the bill initially. And because of their party affiliation, looking back, it was never going to happen. It just was never going to happen. And that little taste that you had of victory on the first side was just a taste, was just like, oh, we like this one person, but we don't like this other person. And so the person that they like, you got a hearing. The person that they didn't like, it was never going to happen anyway. So in that, from what I see, it was doomed from the start. for the first time,
Looking back. Yeah. While we were in it, we had no idea what the problem was. And that wasn't the only problem. The problem was they wanted to do the abortion ban and the anti-CRT stuff. And they did have
There was
other
an agenda
things. There was
already.
an agenda and we weren't on it. And it was the last year before an election year.
It was the anti-woke agenda, which has been going on for a few years.
And it's just anti-progress, to be honest. Like, it is just wasting taxpayer dollars on legislation that I feel is only going to be damaging our society.
Right.
There's so much that I have seen in the last 2 years that has very much disheartened me. And it's been very difficult to have to witness and feel like a bystander to that, where I want to fight for those causes also. But as someone wiser once said, like, you only have so much capacity and you can only tackle one thing. And that's okay. Right? To be okay with that, to be okay with feeling like you let down other communities or that you're not where you know, helping in every way you can. But it's like, I could barely have enough stamina to get this bill passed because essentially it was a lot on my shoulders.
Yeah, of course. And well, the good thing is, one, you know, props again to Senator Stewart, to Representative Escamani, also to Kate and Jeff. All of them were with you. You had also some support with your Make Us Florida team as well there. But there was, you know, the spearheading part, which was a lot on the shoulders, right? And then there's, okay, the down of now this doesn't get passed, and looking back, realizing why it didn't get passed. Well, one, it's almost impossible to pass a bill, but even if everything was going for you, well, even nothing was really going for you on this bill. It probably wasn't going to happen anyway on that first year. But even if things were going for you, a lot of people don't get anything passed. So so there's that. And then I look at it almost like the arc of a kung fu movie, you know, where you were like,
training sequence coming up.
The training sequence comes up after you got the bill denied, right?
Yes.
So you're this kind of talented, like, you know, in Mad Monkey Kung Fu, that one guy, you know, he's very talented, and then, you know, he gets his hand smashed. You know, and he becomes kind of crippled.
I know, but maybe you got to give something more tangible for listeners that aren't Shaw Brother fans and know what you're talking about.
And then he gets this upstart, talented guy. He trains him a little bit. That guy goes out to do some fighting, but he gets his butt kicked. He comes back, and then it's like, oh, now the best part of the traditional Kung Fu Shaw Brothers movie starts, which is the training sequence. And that's kind of where we're at now with the training sequence, which you can't do that without a foundation, right? So all of that happened
without adversity.
Without adversity, number one, but also without some basics to work on. So all of that kind of motivates you to do that. So now we're, you know, towards the middle of because there was a little break, right, after March, like a tiny break. Let's take a breath.
I want to say I started conversations as early as May because it was AAPI Heritage,
right?
And so I started conversations already to try to get legislators on board for next year. The challenge with that was we didn't know who the hell was going to be in office next year because it's an election year now, and so we could expend all our energy having these conversations, but then they may not get elected.
Right.
However, we still had to do it. And we still had to find now a new bill sponsor. And I'm going to be super transparent and honest here. I met with Representative Escamani, and she does know that it's an uphill battle for her in the legislature. She is often very controversial in the House floor, and I love her for it. I love the fact that she is willing to stand on her own 2 feet by her convictions and to what her constituents have asked her to do. She is an ally for so many communities, from the LGBTQ community to any marginalized group to ethnic groups. And it is difficult as a woman, as an Iranian woman, to stand on her own like that. And she does so very powerfully and, in my opinion, elegantly. And it's frustrating for me to watch how much people will say things like, well, I really like her as a person, but I'll never support XYZ, because they just were in the political climate that we're in. And she knew moving in that this year was going to be rough because of the gerrymandering. I'm going to be honest too. Now that my bill's passed, I feel like I could say whatever. I can go back to saying whatever the fuck I want to say, right? Like I did before. when I criticized bills and really felt like the Republicans weren't just going to be in control, but a supermajority, and here and have it. That is what happened. So I had a lot of conversations over the summer, some of which time I'll never get back. And I had to actually, she is the one that actually encouraged me to talk to people that refused to talk to me the year before, or said, hey, I'll support you when you have a new sponsor, kind of thing. And I said, I don't want to talk to these people. They make me mad. And she would tell me, that's not how politics works. You have to just work with everyone. And so I had to really reframe my approach and how I was going to do things. And we did what we could to save the bill last year. But had I known that year what I know now, there might have been ways for me to have saved that bill, to be honest.
Right.
But I don't have the experience. I don't have the knowledge. I didn't go through my training sequence yet.
Right.
So there can't be the victory because I wasn't trained. And so moving in, I knew I needed a new bill sponsor, and I knew the bill sponsor needed to be a Republican.
Right.
And so
the election passes.
Well, no, pre-election, lots of difficult conversations. And I want to share on air, one of the most difficult conversations I had to have was with then Representative Harding, who sponsored the Don't Say Gay bill. And for me to have to sit across from someone that I so much disagree with on putting forth a bill that to me is horrific and problematic for our youth was very much my step into politics, like me saying, okay, I'm accepting this full on now. I'm going to have this conversation. I'm going to go in and I'm only going to talk about this one issue and compartmentalize. I think that if you're talking about like Mulan climbing to the top of the beam and finally getting up there, and it's like, this is the hardest part of the training for me, or,
more likely, more than Mulan climbing up, it's more like one of the hobbits seeing the Eye of Sauron, or Mordor going, oh, that's what that looks like. That's the way it looks like to me.
That I have to be there like this.
You're like, oh, this
well,
is
I was like, okay, well, this is where I decided, right? Am I going to do this? Or am I just going to be an advocate that tries to put good energy out there and hope that the right thing happens?
Well, there's a difference. There's a difference between, and not to disparage either one, because I consider myself adjacent to Mimi, right? And adjacent to kind of whatever, it's just my personality, just who I am, right? I'm just adjacent to you and like, oh, I'll support you, but I don't really have too many highs or lows, right? As far as conviction. That sounds
no,
bad.
not conviction, but in terms of how you decide to take action for things. How you decide to take action.
So there's one road which can be very vocal, standing up for what you truly believe in, and I think there's a beauty to that, and there's
like activism.
Activism. There's something that where that's needed. And then there's the route where you decided to take, which is, in my opinion, a little bit more challenging because you have very strong convictions and that you want to be heard on, but you also really saw the value in getting this bill passed, right? Where education can be the solution to the things that we were seeing. But you kind of have to wade through the sewer for that. Right. It's
I had
almost
to go
like
through a lot of shit for it.
Yeah, there's like, man, I gotta like really like just wade through a lot of this shit. And yeah, so this is kind of where you're seeing, okay, now I have to really focus on just this bill and how would you put it? Mute the other things?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Like put those on hold, on pause.
Right. It's like they're playing on the background, but
yes,
they can't.
But they can't even play in the background. Mm-hmm. Everything had to go on pause, which was very difficult for me because I believe that was the time I also felt so honored that, Rep. Escamani asked me to speak at the reproductive justice rally, which was for abortion access. And I was like, 100%, I'm there. And then as the summer progressed, I realized I need to have these conversations with legislators. And it's not that I couldn't also advocate for these things. It's that I needed to so hyper-focus and also become basically people are going to associate me.
Right, the face of the bill.
With Make Us Visible Florida and the bill. right?
Because
I am already linked to it.
Right.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts because volunteers come and go on a daily, monthly, weekly basis. I want to say there is only one volunteer with me right now that started from the beginning.
And you don't have to say this. We don't need to name names, but unless you want to name names, anyone you give props to. But there are, with something like this, right, which now there's a success to it. And what I've noticed over the course of the year, this momentum building, it's like momentum building. And because I've ridden, on the coattails of the Mimi train for a while, I know what it's like when people try to latch on to that. So there's different, this is where I'm going with this, is that you could have really good intentions, but sometimes shit gets hard. Like to get a bill like this through a community bill, there's going to be volunteers who really put a ton of effort, and there's volunteers that are there just for like resume building, right? And that's just something that I noticed.
Yeah.
On the background, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to take a few minutes to talk about volunteers, Colin started from the beginning, went to Tallahassee 2 weeks ago to see the bill passed in the House unanimously. And I think that was a huge win because not only was he this volunteer that stuck with us the whole time, and he's so humble, told all the other volunteers that were there, well, I've been in and out, because sometimes I have exams. He's a high school student.
Right.
A high school student who decided that this is something that he was going to stay engaged in. And for me, engaged also means just communicative, right? So if I have a volunteer that says, hey, for these months, I'm going to out of the country, or this month I'm going to be here or there. And as long as they're in communication, I don't consider them like checked out, right? I know what's going on. And I'm the same way at the temple, as you know, like with our assistants, with our team, we say, we just want communication. Think over communication, right? And what I hope that volunteering does for people, whether they're in high school or professionals or just, everyday life, college students, like this also gives them a sense of fulfillment, right? Because you don't usually volunteer because you're making money, because you make no money, right? You probably are volunteering because it's a cause you believe in. Because time is our most precious commodity. And for us to be able to use that and take time away, that shows like a dedication on sorts that you have to be passionate about it, or completely crazy, or just have so much time in the world, which I don't ever see that happening because those people still just don't volunteer. But
I think completely crazy is how
you describe me.
No, mostly crazy.
Yeah. Well, later we'll talk about how our bill was mostly debt. But so, and then this year, the first year, like I said, it was building, it was learning, it was going through growth together. And we lost most of those volunteers, whether it was because people graduated from college and they moved on. And we've had so many iterations of people, and I appreciate all of them for whatever moment in time they decided, whether it was one day, one email they sent, and whether people volunteered or not. And they were just like, hey, I'm just going to be a constituent and I'm going to send emails and calls. That was great.
You even have to appreciate those people who are in the community who say, hey, great job. And then sometimes they get credit for it, maybe not deserved, but you still want to give those people props, like saying, well, at least they are putting positive vibes out there.
And supportive. It is really annoying, though, when people take credit for your work.
Right.
I will say.
So these things happen.
It does happen. And the thing is, this year we had a handful, like especially in our creative side, Jamie and Lisa, they really kept everybody informed of what was happening with Make Us Visible, what I couldn't, and have been so great at creating awesome content that I don't have the creativity to do or the time. And then we had some really amazing advocates like Sarah, who would show up to the Capitol from Jacksonville multiple times with a team of humans who also came to testify. And you can see all of those people online. And then this year we got the addition of Jose Fuentes, who is our friend in Miami that actually pretty much works in Tallahassee for his own work, and on sidebar became an advocate for this as a volunteer because it's something he's passionate about, and he is totally helpful in this. So it was great to have a few players who were positively impacting what was happening, but still so much of it fell onto me to make sure, like, okay, I'm not going to let this slip away this time. And, we can talk about Jeff in a bit too, in terms of like him literally being by my side all the time. But as you said, when I was on the phone, you're like, okay, I know who you're talking to. But yeah, so I had some really difficult conversations over the summer where I basically was shopping around for a Republican sponsor. I'll be honest, like that's what I knew it would take. And now we fast forward to the election, and Florida is a super majority Republican state. Super majority.
So, and then you have your beliefs, your things that you see. Well, a lot of things are probably not going to be happening in Florida, but you're hyper focused on this bill, and you need a sponsor. And per recommendations of the previous sponsors, you need a Republican sponsors, right?
Yeah.
So then, really, I think it's kind of amazing how the world works, right? You can take us through the journey of getting Representative Placencia and working with her, but what a lucky and fortunate coincidence it was to actually have her be not only in the district that you live in, but also her end up being the sponsor. And I personally don't know her, right? But I feel like it was really kind of a match made in heaven for this to happen. So you tell me what this is from my side.
Yeah. So we met with a lot of people that were interested. A lot of people said they had previous commitments, meaning they've already promised constituents through their elective process. Like, here's what's going to happen. So Make Us Visible Florida. When I say that, I really mean me and all the Kung Fu students wrote handwritten postcards to every single legislator to thank them.
I remember because I had a competition with one of the students where I was trying to get just one more than that student.
Yeah. So we not thank them, but welcome them to the legislation and to say, hey, here's who we are. Here's what we're doing. We love to have a conversation. And then from there, we did have a lot of advocates, a lot of MUV people that were reaching out and just trying to let people know, hey, vote for this bill when it comes up. This is something we worked on last year. We're going to work on this year. We had a little bit of momentum at the beginning of the year. We still hadn't secured a bill sponsor. Mm-hmm. We didn't secure a bill sponsor till January because, of course, the holidays come up. And so from Thanksgiving to Christmas, it always feels like you can't get anything done.
Which makes you have a nice, relaxing holiday and vacation. That was really nice. Okay, go on. So now now January.
So January hits, and I'm gonna share the story where basically we actually thought we'd have one bill sponsor that was in leadership, and that was kind of recommended to us by several other people. And I tried to get Representative Placencia, as a few people said, you're better off with a freshman because they're more likely to be looking for a bill like this. And then freshmen were telling me, well, you want leadership to do this because they're going to help you get the bill passed. So I felt like I was getting like ping pong back and forth. And Rep Placencia only meets in person. Very old school. And it was very hard to get a meeting with her because they flat out told me, you can meet, but please know she's not going to sponsor your bill. Do you still want to meet? And I said, yes, I absolutely want to meet.
Which I just have to say is totally Mimi style. Like, this is, well, I'll meet you, but nothing's going to come from it. And you're like, all right, cool, I'll still meet you anyway.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted, which is, yeah. We could tangent too many stories off of that, but that's a total Mimi move. Go on.
And so I remember this clearly. I was very tired because it had been no after no after no that week. We had been having a bit of a rough week. I get nervous very quickly when I don't feel like things are happening on the timeline that I want it to.
Right.
So even though it's still early January, everyone's like, oh, you still have a lot of time. Session doesn't start for now until March 6th. You've got March 7th. You have so much time. Don't worry about it. The bill rules are as follows. You have X amount of weeks and months. And for me, my goal was to get a sponsor before the holiday break.
I remember.
So I was very sad that it did not happen. I was on the phones like crazy that week before. I mean, I would have upwards of 7 calls a day, Zooming and pleading with LAs. And, at first it was like, I only want to meet with legislators. And then you realize that's not realistic. You have to talk to their legislative aides, which are often like 21, 2-year-old humans.
And a lot of the unsung heroes, right?
Yeah, some of them, yes. Some of them not very knowledgeable, right? And it's kind of scary that they are the gatekeepers to these legislators and decide who gets a call and who doesn't. Because that really is the case. It's kind of like when you were a drug rep. It's like these gatekeepers make it or break it. You get in the office or you don't based on how your relationship with is. So really this is about relationship building. But I was in the car on my Bluetooth and I was talking to Jeff, as I often did before any of these big meetings. And it's like, how are you feeling? I'm like, I'm ready. I'm exhausted. But you know what? I am going to go in and I'm going to change her mind. And I am going to get her to commit to being the lead sponsor of the bill. And he's like, all right, good, go for it. And I went into the meeting. We sat down, we had a lovely conversation. She's like, okay, well, you know, I'm not sponsoring the bill. That's how this conversation started. And then I started to ask questions as to why. I just said, well, why do you feel that way? Can you share with me what your thoughts are? And, you know, she shared, and I think there was a misunderstanding of what our bill was.
Right.
And I really wanted to explain that Asian American history is American history. We're not actually asking for our own specific course curriculum where we can be highlighted and elevated above other backgrounds. We are very much wanting to ensure that our history is included, that our history is being taught alongside other histories, and by including it in no way takes away from anyone else's, and as a matter of fact, only elevates other histories, right? Learning should be
rising
infinite.
tide, right?
Well, learning should be infinite, right? It's not like, okay, there's only space for this much and we can only fit that in. And yes, there's so many hours in the curriculum in the day, but I mean, there's so many things that go hand in hand, and intersectionality. So I kind of explained like where we were coming from. And then I said, you know, we're right down the road at Wallam Kung Fu on Goldenrod. We're right here. We're in the same neighborhood. And she actually was a student at Wallam Kung Fu. And not just a student, but a student when we were there for the grand opening year. And to go one step further, for those that have watched Pui Chan Kung Fu Pioneer, my documentary, you'll hear my father speak about the fact that had he not gotten an SBA loan, small business loan, he would not have been able to build the Wallam Temple. And her father was actually the one that helped with that SBA loan.
Right.
So there was a real connectivity there that made her very, very excited, because she had has so much respect for my father and her father, and what he's done as an immigrant, and what my father has done to contribute to the country and to contribute to the Central Florida area. She was super, super excited. And by the end of the conversation, she said, you know, I still do think that if you can get leadership, that would be great. But if you don't have a bill sponsor, then yes, I will do it. And then, you know, a few more conversations went by. So I left that meeting and I was elated. Mission accomplished, because now I had security. So it's kind of like, okay, you got one job offer, you're good to go. You know, you're going to have some security, right?
But then the background to that is that per her recommendation
as well as others, it's like, try to find leadership. And then we really just gave it another week, and we're like, you know what? This is the right fit.
Right.
This is the right fit for so many reasons. And we made the connection. I said, let's do this together. I think this is going to be great. She agreed. She said, this is a bill that I can get behind. I support. I'm excited about, and I'm excited to work with you personally. Right. So there was like, you know, we had a very personal connection at this point.
So again, this is from my point of view, right? Not meeting her, but knowing you since 1996.
Yeah.
Knowing you since 1996, right? Is all you have to do is tell me about an interaction with someone for me to know what to make, so that I can make an impression on them. Right? I felt that way before I met Kate and Jeff. I felt that way before I met a ton of people, right?
You say, right? I make you bias. I attribute to your bias.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm well aware of my bias.
Okay.
But I felt that yes, this was right, and again, could be biased, but it made me like her more and more as you can share more of the story to its fruition, right? Of the passing of this bill, of you two having this connection and then enthusiasm from both sides. And to me, the really, really cool part is that you do not identify yourself as a Republican by any means, but you had a Republican sponsor and you were able to interact and work with someone and their team so closely. And you tell me if I'm wrong, but walk away from that and not have really anything negative to say about that person, their team, But just have like really, it's a nice story because it's like these things can happen where people can ideologically differ on this bill or this law, but on certain things, on the fundamentals of like, this is education, or, that you can come together and work on things. So
yeah, I think that this is what government and politics should be, and what it was once.
Right.
People say it used to be that way, where we could disagree on healthcare or insurance and how we do taxes or whatever, but then we could fundamentally disagree on certain things and agree on others and not have it be so divisive.
Right.
And so I would say that my experience in Tallahassee has done both. It has made me very aware that it is not a world I want to exist in, because it is such a challenging, and it can be a very dark place. But on the same flip side of that, I've been so impressed and inspired by the fact that at the end of the day, these people that we see on TV that we either hate or we love and we cheer for, or we, hope for them to, maybe fall into a hole and just never be found, but have food and water and they can sustain on their own, that they actually exist well amongst each other. And I'll even go one step further as to saying a lot of them look like genuinely friends that are across the aisle. They have to exist up there for months without seeing their families, and they talk in the hallways and laugh in the hallways. And a lot of it seems very genuine. And I feel like I read people very well, right? And you can tell there are some outliers to that just are, they're lone wolves, they're who they are, they're grumpy, whatever. But like really what I saw was a little bit, dare I say, hopeful.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, over the past 6-7 years here, we are in a place in Florida and in Orlando specifically where it's 51-49 on either side of almost any issue. And so we're just meshed with and work with and train with people that maybe if we were to discuss a particular issue would be completely opposed, but really like love, right? We've talked about this a lot before, but on my side, again, it's just cool to see that you were able to connect with someone like Representative Placencia, who on paper, maybe you wouldn't agree with, but man, there's so much cohesion, so much things that you do agree with on values and things like that. And it is hopeful that maybe we can continue to look at things that way, right? Because when it comes to things like you said earlier, as far as media, to me, something that Dan Carlin said a while ago is the historian and the podcaster, he goes, he sees, because he was in news before, that they are just like looking and saying, okay, heat, how can we put more heat? Because that heat is what angers people and fuels people. And I think on politics, sometimes there's the same thing, like how the way that you get people energized is through this heat. And I think if you were to take that away, that people could get along probably a little bit better. Really, it comes down to conversations, right? So, I mean, you tell me where you want to go with it, but you have your sponsors. There's, again, from my side, seeing that you're getting on more committees because you're traveling to Tallahassee more. And then, up until that passing of the bill, but you take the story where you want to from there.
Yeah. So I started off by being very relieved that we got the bill sponsors. And we also secured Senator Rodriguez from Miami-Dade, who was on board, didn't have any questions, also had showed up to our Miami Make Us Visible Florida Day, the office did. And so we knew that, she was already on board with the AAPI bill. And so we were really excited to have our sponsors. And then now it was co-sponsors. Like, we need to get co-sponsors. And it became a bit of a all-day Zoom call kind of thing, back to back, sometimes hanging up from Zoom, picking up the phone, routing them to different people, and having some of our community members really help with that and reach out. But ultimately, that is the key, was just having conversation after conversation after conversation. And so we're really excited because we started to get more bill sponsors. And by the time, we were in our first committee, I think we already had like 20 something bill sponsors. Which,
right, I remember there was not that you're competitive or anything, but I remember you and maybe it was Jeff Hammond that we're going to get the most co-sponsors or something like that.
We definitely wanted a lot of co-sponsors, but I think what happened was it just kind of became a wildfire thing. So once we started to get one, we were like, okay, we're going to get the ones around the district in the same areas, and they all talk to each other, or people who sit next to each other, maybe they're talking. And yeah, we became very popular in Tallahassee because every time we'd call, like, oh, someone just told us they spoke to you, or, it just became kind of a recurring theme. And I would talk to Rep P's team, Representative Placencia, and they're like, yeah, you all are getting very popular. People keep coming to my desk and asking me what is going on with this AAPI history bill. Tell me a little bit more about it. They just called me. And so I was like, all right, you're getting another sponsor. And so we started racking up the numbers, which was very, very exciting. And I want to say, briefly, how unbelievably grateful and thrilled I was at the level of communication that Representative Placencia's team gave. And I'll just straight out call him out. He may not want me to, but Victor was above and beyond in terms of being a partner in this with me. A lot of times you could get a bill sponsor and they may never even call you back, or they may be like, yeah, I'll work on that, or maybe take ownership of the bill and just run with it, and you don't get to continue your input. Every step of the way, there was so much intention with ensuring that I was involved in the process. I was told as soon as possible what was happening, if there were changes, if there were questions, if there were concerns, if there was positivity, like the level of communication. And I'm an over communicator as well. So I expect over communication, but I also am not afraid to continuously text someone until they decide to pick up or call me back or find out what's going on. And so I was so grateful for the fact that we were able to work so hand in hand to get this done. Like, it was definitively something where we were doing, and it made us work more, right? It made us want to get more sponsors. It made us want to work harder.
Momentum.
Yeah, it builds momentum, but also you felt like you were working with someone that cared, that was also elevating you. And so it made you just, all that energy was just moving in the right direction. We were going. And so we were racking up the numbers of the bill sponsors. I mean, I think by the end we had over 55 on the House side and like 15 on the Senate side. I think we actually ended up even more on the House side, because what happens is after a bill passes, people can still jump on as co-sponsors.
Right.
So we stopped like counting or caring, because what happened was, we got on our first committee on the Senate side before session started, and that was my goal too. I wanted to get through one of the committees before session, and I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought session had to begin before you could get on a committee. Had I known this, I would have been really crazy to get my bill sponsor earlier, and I would have been going crazy to try to get on committees earlier.
Right.
Because special sessions that one guy that likes to fight with Disney and the mouse, took up special sessions, took up legislators' time on his own agenda, and it pushed everything back. And so had I known that we were able to do that, I would have pushed for that much earlier. But it took a while to get the bill written. It took a while to get the momentum. But we actually ended up having our first Senate hearing on March 6th, which is the day before session started. So goal accomplished.
So this is, there's two things. One is there's this hopeful side of you working hand in hand and doing things. And also, you can imagine that there's a lot of other representatives and senators who are also doing the same with their constituents, right? They were duly elected, whether gerrymandering or not, right? But they were elected, and so they are now then trying to do what they were elected to do. But there's the ugly side, which is one person can have a personal agenda, which then just completely wastes time.
Yeah, basically.
Right? It just completely wastes time. And whether or not what he's wasting time on are bills that you may not agree on, he's wasting the voters' time.
Taxpayers.
And the taxpayers' time. And he's wasting the legislators' time who are trying to do their job, right? whether you agree on what they're trying to pass or not, right?
Correct.
It's just a complete, on that side, it's unfortunate that you can see that one person based on a petty agenda and like my feelings got hurt type of thing, that they can just waste so much time. And that's kind of the ugly side of politics, but I'm sure that it can be seen throughout the entire country. I'm sure it's on.
Yeah, I think we have some extremities here of that in Florida, though. I think that we have a very unique situation, and I've shared with you, and you mention it all the time. And when I would tell anybody from, New York or Portland, I talk to people all the time. Oh yeah, I'm working on this education bill. I got laughed at because they said, well, why? They're taking away education in Florida. They're taking books off shelves. They don't let you guys read there or let children read. And it was so frustrating to be fighting against that rhetoric because it's true. There was so much here that was a challenge, that was an uphill battle. There is so much here that contradicts what we were doing. Right. And it's honestly why I stayed out of the news media from February through now, because I specifically thought, well, no news is good news. Let's just stay low. Let's just try to get this done. Let's just work really hard at it. Let's have the conversations we've been having. Legislators are on board. No one has really come to us and been like, no, we absolutely hate this. We're not doing this. We passed unanimously through the House floor. That's 140 representatives for our original 287 bill. And so we knew that we had something. We knew that the energy was there. And so we got through that. And then the Senate was like, okay, we're on our way. Just like last year, the Senate was super supportive. No problems there. We'll just focus on the House.
So now this, what we're coming up to is like the last really major roadblock. Like the thought is just one more committee to go. We'll get on it. We've already got unanimous support. Once that committee happens, we're good to go. But that's not what happened.
So no, what happened was we got on the Senate and then we got on the House. That went through, and we had 3 of each. So 1 down
on each side
and 2 to go. And then we got our next House one, and you and I were traveling, and we finally came back and said, I'm going to Tallahassee. I'm going to advocate and make sure we get on this 3rd committee. I want to make sure all the wheels are in motion. I want to lock in more co-sponsors. I want to have personal conversations. So we finally got back and we were like hitting the ground running in March. We're like, I'm going to go there. I'm going to make this happen. And so we go there and I testified in the committee. It was amazing. Representative Placencia said some really, really meaningful things on the record out loud. And that was awesome. And then we started to go around. I think I had 20,000 steps on one of those days, just to give you an idea of how much running around literally there is in the Capitol. And so we did talk to some senators as well, but we had the next chair on the 2nd committee over here was a co-sponsor of our bill. So we're like, well, the chair of the committee is going to put our bill forward because clearly he already supports it. And so we just like putting all our ducks in a row, kind of running around, having so many conversations, so much reinforcement, racked up some more co-sponsors, like, yeah, success. And that was before Easter. And so then we noticed, oh, the Senate committee is not meeting again. So that's kind of weird. And then we got on the 3rd agenda for the House. We're like, okay, awesome. House is on its way. And then we noticed again, the Senate wasn't meeting and that everybody was going on vacation for Easter. And we're like, okay, this is April now. So we're a bit concerned. What's going on? So we have these conversations. We're hitting the phones. I am calling like crazy, Zooming with people. What is happening? Don't worry. You're not on this week. You're on next week. And now we're in mid-April. And I said, okay, well, I hope so because next week is the final committee hearing for the 2nd committee in the Senate that we need. And that's on Thursday. And I said, okay, you said we're going to be on that one. So the first one goes and then we're waiting on the House side now to be heard on the floor because that's the final step for the House. And then the agenda comes out on that Thursday and we're not on the agenda. And I was like, shit, the bill's dead.
Right. I remember this. So now you're thinking, well, if we're not on the agenda.
That's it. The bill's dead because you have to get through your committees. And so who do I call on Friday? everybody possible. But guess what? Everyone's off Friday. They go home or whatever. So I have to sit through the weekend and contemplate on the fact that what am I going to do? Is this bill just going to die? Because this is deja vu from last year now.
Is it now the thought, well, I guess we got another year, maybe next year?
Yeah, yeah. The thought is, you know what, maybe next year. And then Monday morning rolls around and I'm calling everybody I can call. I call Jose, who's in Tallahassee. I'm on my way to Tallahassee. I'm not there yet. Just like every senator, no one is there because Monday is travel day. So we have yet another issue, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And I'm talking to Jeff on the phone, as I always am when I'm stressing out about these bills. And I said, I guess I'm going to Tallahassee today. You know, let's do this. And Jeff was there to be a support. He's like, all right, hopping on a plane. Let's do this. Let's go. And I pick him up from the airport and we drive straight to Tallahassee on Monday night. Tuesday morning, we storm the office of the Senate and that sounded really grand.
You stormed the office.
But it really wasn't so much. We patiently waited outside in the hall as the senator was waiting for us. Like, what is happening? What can we do? And just to kind of give you a little bit of backtrack, what I had done was had several conversations at the beginning of the summer before. One was with the Senate President team. That's the policy writing team for education. And they were on board very early on. We talked about all of the crazy from the year before. We talked about the bill language. Is there anything that needs changing? I want to make sure I have checks and balances. We also had lined up a conversation with the governor's education policy team to let them know, hey, this bill looks like it's going to be going forward. We want to make sure there's no red flags. Are there any questions about our bill? What can we be doing? Like, we had all these things lined up. We had all these moving pieces ready to go so that we could ensure that from every angle we had coverage. So that morning, the day before the morning that we stormed the Senate and said, hey, kick down the door, what's up now? We got to be careful about saying storm the Capitol because it has a totally different connotation now. But I basically had called the Senate President office and tried to see, like, what can be done, what can be done, what can be done. They're like, you need to talk to your bill sponsor. So I went to our bill sponsor and she was shocked. You know, like, I thought the bill was going to be on as well. We don't know what we're going to do. We're going to try a few things. And then I went and talked to Representative Placencia's team. And with those two conversations were the only move here, because we thought maybe what they could do, instead of making us go on that second and third committee, pushing us to the third committee, skipping this one so that we could keep going. Right. And we were trying for that, and that looked like it was going to be a no-go. So at first it was like, yeah, maybe. And then we went back and forth. Then it was, no, that's not going to happen. And then it was like, well, can they just push us straight to the floor, or can we, what's called message over? So can we go through the House, that bill gets messaged over to the Senate, and the Senate will just pick it up right on the House floor and just like pass it. So we thought for a moment that was going to go. So this Tuesday was really painful because it was a lot of back and forth, and it was a lot of waiting, and it was a lot of like trying to figure out what's going to happen. And essentially what ended up happening was the bill sponsor, Representatives team, said, I think we can get this amended. Let's try to get this amended to another bill.
Which means
another bill that looks like it's going to pass, but hasn't gone through all its committees yet. It needs to be amended in the committee.
Right.
And then that bill can then go to the House floor. So if it's already gone, we missed the opportunity. And it technically could get amended to any bill, preferably an education bill, but honestly, it could just get amended to anything. Like, this bill is being passed for, commercial land being used at this time, whatever. And by the way, there's an amendment, which would make no sense. But yeah, so you can amend to any bill as long as the sponsors agree, and that you can then get past a committee, but it has to be heard in committee. So then we looked at what's left, and we really were running out of options. And the next day, less than 24 hours, Education Employment was meeting in the House side, and that was the big package. That was the big HB 1537 package, the education package for the year. And it was run by Representative Rizzo, who was one of our co-sponsors. So it was like that hard work coming back.
Right.
And then in addition, someone in that committee had to agree to be the person amending it onto the bill. So that person has to be a committee member saying, hey, I want to amend this bill, amend onto your bill, and be part of that committee. It has to come from someone. And we had Representative Trabulsi, who was our co-prime on our bill, had several conversations with her over the summer. So we got lucky in the fact that that was still available, but our hard work in lining up those relationships absolutely came into play. And then on the Senate side, our dear friend Jose had already been having a conversation with Senator Avila about the same thing.
Right.
And I'm like, that's what we're being amended to. Let's get Avila on board. Senator Rodriguez started that conversation, and then we were waiting to find out if the Senate side would go. So the House side, we were set because the committee was the next day, and we're like, oh my gosh, amazing. I'll be here. Let's just stay. We'll advocate for the bill. We'll make sure it gets amended. And the only reason we were allowed to do that within the 24 hours is because somebody on the committee was adding it on. So a bill is not dead if it's mostly dead. Like, it can still pass if you basically CPR this thing and bring it back to life.
One of those
defibrillators, right?
Oh, I thought it was one of the fire blower things that Billy Crystal used in.
In Princess Bride?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what that's called.
Yeah, what is that called?
It's like something to air the fire.
The fireplaces. Yeah. So it was mostly dead. Actually, the bill had died. And we revived it by running around.
You revived it with true love.
Let's just
say it for what it is.
Yeah, so we revived the bill by saying, yes, it could be amended. But there was an all-day waiting pattern. So it was like, okay, let's just sit and wait and see what happens. And we had these conversations so that when Senator's team was like, well, let's make sure it's okay with the governor's office, the education policy team, we had already met with them. They were all good. So because we had already lined up all the ducks in a row, because we had already kind of gotten everything in place, when the asks were made, it was very well received.
Right.
And so then we had the Senate side locked in, which meant we had security because we weren't sure which bill was going to get chosen. And they called this bill the train. And once we were amended to it, they were like, all you got to do is ride this thing out. And then that's what we did.
So it's sort of like me hitching a ride onto Mimi. Boom, success. So I guess let's kind of recap this, right? Because there's a lot of excitement from your side, and I remember being there, not being there physically, but being around and listening and going, oh God, what's going to happen? Heart rate goes up. All right, relax. Okay, almost passed out. Another heart attack. Okay, then down. So the bill essentially, because it didn't go through certain committees, was dead. It was going to happen. And the only reason that it stayed alive is because you and Jeff and also with some assistance with your another advocate, Jose Fuentes, and also because of the tenacity of Victor and Placencia's team, right? It's like this combination of all that, but all that is to say that comes down to success with almost everything else in life, which is there's this basic of hard work and tenacity, but relationships as well. You can't really have success just being a hard worker. You can't have success just with tenacity. You also need the relationships. And this is not a dig on other, let's call them activists, right? Is that if you want to get things done, like if you want to get shit done, sometimes you have to be able to build a relationship, which means sometimes swallowing a bit of pride. And I think it's something that it rings very true for me, because now in my 40s, I look back to things that I said, saying, no, I'm going to say what I feel because I'm saying what I feel because I know that's what my truth is. And that many times doesn't accomplish anything. Many times what it does is it can anger the other side, or maybe not make them see what you're trying to make them see. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lesson here where just in life, just because you think something is right, doesn't mean that the way you approach this thing to see yourself, to make yourself visible, is not just by shouting. Sometimes it has to be with a conversation and a laugh and things like that. And also compromise, right? okay, I'm going to not look at these things to try to get this greater thing done. And that's kind of just the way life is, right? It's kind of gray. It's not necessarily black or white in all instances.
Yeah, and I wouldn't call it greater. It would just be like, that is the cause that I've chosen at this moment in time, right?
Okay,
it's
right.
not to put something above anything else happening. It's just what I have capacity for and what I feel I have the ability to do, right? Because you have to look at what's possible. So if I had gone in and asked for all these crazy things and said, no, I only want it this way or nothing at all, like obviously you're just not going to get anything done. But 1000%, this has come down to relationships, because kind of what I just laid out to you in this very long, drawn out story, and I don't know if anyone's following still, but Representative Placencia and Victor, like they fought for this bill because we had built a relationship, because we were already fighting together. They felt our effort and our support the entire way. So when it came down to the wire at the end, and I mean the end, this was the end of session, time was running out. There was other bills to be considered. There was other work to be done. They put things on hold because this was a priority for them, because they made it a priority because I was a priority. At least they made me feel that way, right? It was very much a team effort. And then because of the relationships we had built, like, you know, through Jose as well, and also through getting co-sponsors, we didn't have to beg them to be on board with this. They were already co-sponsors, and they knew us because we had built a relationship already. And, you know, whether it was me that called or Jose that called that legislator, it was like we all had already spoken to them and had a very positive outlook. Like they looked at our organization as very positive. They liked our bill. So we had already built the relationships. We didn't have to build a new one. Right. And because of that hard work, but absolutely it came down to relationships. Like me showing up to Tallahassee, had I not gone there that Monday, I really believe the bill would have died, because I don't think they could have fought with it without me, right? Like we had to fight together. We had to fight for it together. We had to revive it together. It was definitely something that I needed to be there for. Otherwise, then it wouldn't have become the priority, right? Like you have to stand in that doorway and say, hey, I'm here. Let's go. And yeah, so it made all the difference. And so showing up and doing that was what basically made this happen. I don't believe the bill would be signed as it is today. And the only frustrating part was, of course, there was like amendments back and forth. So it passed in the House. We had all our advocates come out. It was on the House floor. It was amazing. Representative Placencia shared a beautiful story. HB 287 passed unanimously. HB 1537 also passed unanimously. So technically 2 bills of ours were passed in one day on the House. Then we just had to sit and wait for the Senate to happen. And then a week later, the Senate happened. But because there was another amendment, we then had to wait again for it to go back on the House. And we were just like, we just want closure. We want this to be over. We want this to be over. And I kept getting assured, look, you're on the train. It's just a matter of when. And then it finally passed. And it was like, whew. But last thing is the signature. This needs to be signed. And we thought we were going to get a bill signing ceremony, not us personally, but HB 1537. We were in touch with Representative Rizzo, like, when is this going to happen? We'd like to be there. We'd like the community support. We'd like to witness this. And it really was done very clandestine. Honestly, they didn't even know what was happening until it happened. And then all of a sudden we find out, yes, the bill was signed. It wasn't really even announced that we're signing these numbered bills. Here's formally what's happening. There was a multitude of bills signed yesterday, which was May 9, on education in general. Like it was just generally like, here's all the things in education that's happened, bits and pieces of it. They never once mentioned our amendment. And so I'm mentioning the amendment. I want everyone to know that this has happened. And so, yeah, so the bill passed yesterday, you know, in this big education package. And that finally, I think, has been the final sense of relief.
So now we're back full circle, okay, from where we started the conversation of like the bill's passed, why, here's the story. There's a ton of ups and downs, and really, it's just like anything else. You kind of explained it as climbing Mount Everest, right? And I was I kind of flew to the Himalayas, but I stayed at base camp, right? But I was like, all right, well, cool. I'm seeing what's happening, but you and everyone else who kind of climbed up that map to the peak are the only ones who can really say this is really how it was. And so that excitement and that enthusiasm, there's a lot of support, but really, it's really hard. Just like anything else, you can't really experience it unless you experience it.
Yeah,
right? So,
we tease that we're trauma bound now, but it's true. Like, I guess people who run a marathon or people who do these extreme sports or climb a mountain, like, until you've done that and you know what it was like to, like, run out of breath halfway through, but keep pushing past that. You know what it's like physically. Like, we can imagine that it's difficult. We can imagine and say, wow, that must be really hard, but you can't actually understand what a legislative process is like until you've actually done it.
Right.
You really cannot, because there's so many highs and so many lows and so many challenges and things that will come up. And in one day, you can have the best day and then the worst day and then the best day again and then the worst day again. And so it's just
really
constant.
The two things that I would recommend is, one, well, if you've already made it this far, then now you have the full story. If you want to have kind of an action-packed version of this, just take this story, think about this story, watch Mad Monkey Kung Fu, because I just can't get that vision out of my head now. And then you'll see the ups and the downs of this, right? Of what it takes to make a bill, which is sometimes you're going to get your hand smashed, but then as long as you have that really cool training sequence and someone to fight with at the end, you're going to succeed. So that's what that would be my recommendation of how to get the full picture of this story. But the other thing that I would like to say is that you should really feel a sense of accomplishment, right? Just because I never broke a 5-minute mile doesn't mean I can't be like, damn, you broke a 5-minute mile? And that's kind of how I feel about what happened here. So you should be able to kind of have this feeling, I'm hoping, of accomplishment and maybe take a second to celebrate that. And regardless of what other voices may be out there, that because sometimes when you do something that's positive, there's also, you can't help but do something positive and still have a little bit of negativity out there. Just almost impossible. Haters want to hate, lovers want to love, so so then you just want to make sure that you take that time to be like, yep, no, we did this. And there's a lot of positivity to that. So what else do you want to talk about?
Meal planning. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, let's now switch it over to no. So that on for me as the person doing the interview, I have no further questions, and the defense rests.
No, I appreciate you sitting down and kind of help me hash out all my thoughts on this, because it has been a really challenging couple of years, and people always ask me things like, after I finish the documentary, how'd you do this thing? That's another thing that people don't understand unless they've done it themselves, is a full-length feature documentary on your own father and your Wallam system. But yeah, I don't know that I would do this again. I'm not sure, right? Like, it's funny because now that I've built all these relationships, I feel like, wow, legislators would ask me, hey, what's your next bill? What else are you working on? Let me know. And you feel like you should seize the opportunity to continue that journey. But I know myself, and that I need to definitely take a moment. And now you're going, oh my God, what's happening?
Take a moment. Well, here's a thought that I was having today. Okay. So today, Wednesday. Okay. So this exactly happened today. I was standing out in the patio of the Kung Fu school, watching your dad work while I was drinking water, as I'm ought to. That's kind of my thing, because just watching him work while I was sipping on some water. And I was thinking about how your dad is so well respected in the community for everything that he's done. And then you were being interviewed by a news organization. I was like, wow, Mimi is on her way to do the same thing as what her dad is doing, which is be a really well respected member of the community. Like this, you getting this bill passed doesn't mean, well, it can if you wanted to. It doesn't mean you have to go, okay, now I'm going to get another bill passed. But it means that you are making an imprint in the community in Orlando in the same way that your dad is making an imprint, right? And it's just, okay, now you're known as someone who is a community leader in Orlando, right? These are the steps that you take. And so the cool thing about this whole process is that now is known. Whether or not there's people out there who want to take credit for your work, right? Who want to be interviewed and say, yeah, I was in it when they really weren't in it, right? But what I'm saying is that the people who know, me being one of them, can see, I kind of see this thing where, oh, this is when maybe Mimi's story is told. I'm like, oh, here's how some of the steps that she was taking to become a community leader. By no means do you need to do anything else. I'm just saying that's the thought process that I had. The end.
Well, people ask if I have vacations planned. I'm like, yeah, we always have vacations planned. That goes without saying. And that's the problem, is I actually have to leave the country in order to take a hiatus from the work. Otherwise, it does consume me. And that could be a podcast in its own on how we're able to come down from these type of projects and these type of goal setting things, where now, how do you bring all that adrenaline, all that cortisol, how do you bring all that down? Because it takes me a while to kind of settle into this and to say, okay, am I being lazy? Is there something I should be doing now? And trying to realize, like, the act of resting, the act of doing,
it's recovery.
It's
the reset.
Is actually action, right? The word action, I think, gets misconstrued, where rest doesn't equal action, but that is the act. And action is resting.
If you were to look at it in kind of, let's say you're trying to build some lean muscle, that happens during the rest, right? All of the building happens during the rest. A workout itself is actually technically not good for you. It's the recovery that you allow yourself to have. Now, someone like you needs to think of rest as an action. Someone like me loves rest. I don't need to think of it as an action or not an action. I could take a nap right now. I could take a nap 20 minutes from now. I can go do something and have a great night's sleep. Wake up, have breakfast, take a nap. So what I'm saying is that there's different ways to look at it. But if it helps you to look at rest as an action, I'm all about it.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there and maybe we'll take a nap. But thanks for having the conversation with me. Listeners, I hope that this clarified a bit of the process, maybe demystified it, but also kind of go into the weeds about it, a little bit of the behind the scenes and how this really happened. And I don't know that I was able to really articulate the drama that was that Tuesday of saving this bill, but it was super intense and it has been a wild ride. I'm grateful that it is over. Shout out again to Jeff, who really kind of stuck by me through those few weeks, but 2 years, obviously, but really, it was super challenging and I could not have done this without that support.
Tuesday was really, now that I think about it, more like the Raid Redemption. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Raid Redemption, great action film if you want to see just carnage and lots of action. But yeah, I think that it is definitely time for rest. So thanks so much. Bye.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.